The year is 1519. A Spanish soldier named Bernal Diaz del Castillo is standing on a mountain ridge, looking down into a valley, and he stops breathing. Not from exhaustion, from pure, uncomprehending shock. Because below him, rising from the middle of a vast, glittering lake, connected to the mainland by 3 enormous stone causeways, is a city. A city of gleaming white pyramids. A city laced with canals so clean and organized they carry more daily traffic than any river in Europe. A city with botanical gardens, rooftop flower terraces, and a central market so incomprehensibly large that Cortés himself, a man who had seen Seville, who had seen Rome, would write to the King of Spain that there was nothing in the known world to compare to it. Bernal Diaz would remember that moment for the rest of his life. He wrote, decades later, that the soldiers beside him were whispering to each other, asking whether what they were seeing was real or a dream.
They said it was a city of gold and dreams.
But it was not a dream. It was Tenochtitlan. Built from a swampy, uninhabited island in less than 200 years, without iron tools, without the wheel, and without a single beast of burden larger than a dog. Welcome to Mystique History. How does a wandering, landless nomadic tribe arrive at a muddy island in the middle of a brackish lake, and within 2 centuries construct the largest city in the Western Hemisphere? How do you engineer a metropolis of 300,000 people on water, design its plumbing, its food supply, its flood control, its street grid?
Notice the pressurized double pipe.
Using only stone, wood, obsidian, and a level of collective genius that leaves modern civil engineers shaking their heads. Let me explain. But before the pyramids, before the aqueducts, before any of the engineering marvels that will unfold in this story, we have to go back to a moment of absolute desperation. Because the story of Tenochtitlan is, at its core, the story of people who had nothing and built everything. The Mexica, the people history calls the Aztecs, though they never used that name themselves, were not always powerful. When they arrived in the Valley of Mexico around 1300 CE, every fertile, desirable piece of land was already occupied by established city-states, with walls, armies, and long memories.
We must tread carefully if we are to survive here.
The Mexica had nothing to offer except their labor.
We seek only the opportunity to work for Culhuacan.
They hired themselves out as mercenary soldiers, fighting other people's battles for land that was never quite theirs. Neighboring rulers considered them outsiders at best, a nuisance at worst.
The gods have promised us an empire.
Then came the prophecy. According to Mexica tradition, so central to their identity it is still encoded in the flag of modern Mexico, their patron deity Huitzilopochtli had promised a divine sign. An eagle, perched on a cactus growing from a rock, holding a serpent in its talons. That vision would mark the site of their destined city. In 1325, a scout wading through the reed marshes on the western edge of Lake Texcoco looked up from the water and saw it. An eagle, a cactus, a serpent, on a small, rocky, entirely inhospitable island surrounded by cold, mildly salty water, no freshwater springs, no stone, swampy, windswept, difficult to reach, and ringed on every shore by established rivals who would not welcome a new neighbor.
Look to the cactus, the sign given by the gods. Here we found Tenochtitlan.
The Mexica called it Tenochtitlan, roughly, place of the prickly pear cactus, and they began to build. The first problem was food. A small island in a lake cannot grow enough crops to sustain a large population through conventional farming.
1, 2.
The soil is poor, the fresh water scarce, the land impossibly limited. The Mexica solution was the chinampa, what later observers would romantically call the floating gardens of Tenochtitlan. Picture this precisely. Mexica laborers wade into the shallows of the lakebed and drive stakes into the mud in long rectangular patterns. Between the stakes, they weave a dense fence of reeds and branches.
Keep the baskets moving quickly.
Into that walled-off rectangle they pile lake sediment, decomposing aquatic vegetation, rich dark mud, shoveled and carried by hand, until the accumulated mass rises above the waterline. A long, narrow, elevated garden plot, anchored permanently by the roots of willow trees planted deliberately around its perimeter. Their dense, fibrous root systems gripping the edges like fingers pressed into wet clay. Water channels run between adjacent plots, navigable by canoe, providing constant moisture to the raised beds above. Repeat this process thousands of times across 30,000 acres of marshland, and you have transformed a lake into one of the most productive agricultural systems the pre-industrial world ever produced. 1 hectare of chinampa could yield between 4 and 7 harvests per year. 7, from soil that had been open water a generation before. And here is the detail that makes this system genuinely astonishing from an engineering perspective. The Mexica simultaneously solved their urban waste problem with the same mechanism. Waste from the city was collected daily by organized canoe crews and transported directly to the chinampa gardens as fertilizer.
Bring the next vessel to the edge.
Quickly now, spread it evenly before the sun is high.
Tenochtitlan produced almost no waste that wasn't immediately converted into agricultural productivity. No waste discharged into the water supply, no accumulation in the streets.
I am faster than you!
A closed-loop system of urban nutrient cycling that kept the city clean and the gardens perpetually fertile. London, at this same moment in history, was dumping its waste directly into the Thames and drawing drinking water from the same river downstream. The second engineering challenge was fresh water. Lake Texcoco's water was too mineral-rich to drink, particularly in the shallower eastern sections. The Mexica response was characteristically precise.
Harder, men! Heave! Heave! Heave!
Not 1 aqueduct, but 2, built in parallel so that when one channel required cleaning or repair, the other carried full flow without interruption to the city below. Each aqueduct stretched more than 4 kilometers across open water, supported on stone pillars driven into the lakebed, carrying spring water through terracotta-lined channels from the freshwater sources at Chapultepec, directly into Tenochtitlan's distribution network of clay pipes and wooden channels.
Templo Mayor district.
Water reached public fountains, palace gardens, bathhouses, and private homes. The population of Tenochtitlan bathed on average twice per day, not as an elite luxury.
They do this every day, Francisco.
As a societal norm across all classes, recorded with visible astonishment by Spanish chroniclers who arrived from a continent where annual bathing was considered entirely adequate. Emperor Moctezuma II bathed 4 times daily. Aztec soap was made from the root of the causeways plant, a natural saponin that lathers in water. Teeth were cleaned with ground charcoal and salt. Public sanitation facilities were maintained at regular intervals throughout the city, with dedicated attendants keeping them functional. This was not a detail of courtly refinement. This was civic infrastructure.
Quickly, we need more men on the eastern causeway.
The third engineering achievement was flood control. Lake Texcoco's water levels fluctuated dramatically between wet and dry seasons.
The city walls did not hold. We need
A particularly destructive flood in the 1440s prompted the Mexica under ruler Moctezuma I and the brilliant allied king Nezahualcoyotl of Texcoco to commission the construction of the Great Dike.
Pull, heave, lift the stone.
Stretching between 12 and 16 kilometers across the lake, this massive earthwork and stone barrier separated the fresher western waters around Tenochtitlan from the more saline and flood-prone eastern sections. It was one of the largest hydraulic engineering projects in the pre-Columbian Americas, requiring the coordinated labor of thousands of workers, the precise calculation of water levels and current flows,
But the seasonal readings indicate a coming surge. We must account for the...
and a structural design robust enough to withstand the pressure of an entire lake during the rainy season. Now walk into the city itself. 3 broad stone causeways connected Tenochtitlan to the mainland, each wide enough for 8 to 10 people to walk abreast, elevated above the lake surface, and interrupted at regular intervals by removable wooden drawbridge sections. The drawbridges served a dual purpose. They controlled both water flow between sections of the lake system and the movement of people and canoes through the city's aquatic network. Every entry point into Tenochtitlan was, simultaneously, a toll gate, a flood control valve, and a defensive choke point. The geography of the city was its own fortification. Inside the causeways, Tenochtitlan was laid out in a deliberate grid, unusual in the ancient world, and clearly intentional. The city was divided into 4 great quarters by 2 main avenues meeting at the ceremonial center, echoing the Mexica cosmological concept of a world oriented around 4 cardinal directions meeting at a sacred axis. Within each quarter, a network of stone streets ran parallel to water canals, providing dual circulation, on foot along the raised pathways, or by canoe through the channels alongside. Tens of thousands of flat-bottomed canoes moved through those canals daily, carrying produce from the chinampa gardens, building materials for the constantly expanding city, trade goods from across the empire, and ordinary people going about ordinary lives on the water. The market at Tlatelolco, Tenochtitlan's sister city merged into the island's northern end, was the commercial heart of an empire spanning over 80,000 square kilometers from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific coast. Cortés estimated 60,000 people trading there on a normal day, 60,000 in a single market. It was divided into dedicated sections for every conceivable category of goods: goldwork, featherwork of extraordinary delicacy, pottery, fine cotton textiles, live animals, medicinal herbs, cacao, jade, turquoise, rubber, salt, timber, prepared food, and dozens more categories, each with its own established price conventions.
We have the finest lumber from the forests.
Market inspectors circulated continuously. Dedicated judges sat at the market's edge to resolve any commercial dispute immediately. Weights and measures were standardized, counterfeit goods were prosecuted, the currency was cacao beans. Actual chocolate, standardized by count, actively protected against counterfeiting by market authorities, and exchangeable at established rates for virtually any good in the empire.
They are of good quality. We can make the exchange.
A turkey hen cost 100 cacao beans. A large tomato, 1. A fully built canoe, around 100. An entire economy running on chocolate, administered by a state that taxed tribute from every corner of an empire.
Tlaloc. Huitzilopochtli.
At the geographic heart of the city stood the sacred precinct, a walled ceremonial compound 500 meters on each side, containing approximately 45 public buildings. And at its center, the Templo Mayor, the Great Temple. A twin pyramid structure rising over 30 meters above the plaza floor, its 2 staircases climbing steeply to separate sanctuaries at the summit. One dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, divine patron of the Mexica. painted a vivid ceremonial red. The other to Tlaloc, the ancient rain god essential to agriculture, painted in deep sky blue. From across the lake in clear weather, those colors were visible for kilometers, a beacon announcing the center of the world to anyone approaching across the water.
The gods truly reside here.
The Templo Mayor was not built once. It was reconstructed and enlarged 7 times across 2 centuries, each successive ruler encasing the previous pyramid within a larger shell, the structure growing with the ambition and power of the state, like an architectural biography of the empire itself. When archaeologists began excavating beneath the streets of Mexico City in 1978, after a construction worker's pick struck an enormous carved stone disc buried just below the surface, they uncovered over 7,000 objects from the Templo Mayor's ritual deposits alone. Jade mosaic masks, coral brought from both coastlines, marine organisms from the Pacific and the Gulf, turquoise, obsidian, objects carried from every corner of the empire to the navel of the world as offerings. The children who grew up in the shadow of that pyramid went to school. All of them, and this is not a detail to slide past quickly. Mexico society maintained 2 primary educational institutions, operating simultaneously for children of all social backgrounds. The Calmacac was attached to temples and trained the children of the nobility and those destined for the priesthood in astronomy, history, theology, rhetoric, calendar interpretation, and the reading of the painted codices that encoded Mexica history and knowledge.
Discipline is the bedrock of the warrior.
The Telpochcali, one in each neighborhood across the city, provided commoner boys with military training, physical conditioning, civic education, and vocational instruction.
Discipline in these crafts prepares you for service to the Huaytla.
Girls attended institutions where weaving was a central discipline, not merely a domestic skill but a technically demanding craft in which complex textile production functioned simultaneously as economic activity, social communication, and artistic expression. Universal education, organized by the state, operating across a city of 300,000 people in 1500. The warriors emerging from the Telpochcali schools wore their achievements on their bodies. Mexican military rank was determined entirely by performance, specifically by the number of opponents a fighter had captured in combat. Rank dictated dress, permitted ornamentation, social standing, and access to the warrior elite orders. The eagle warriors wore helmets fashioned from actual eagle heads, the open beak framing the fighter's face, the feathered suit transforming the man into the sky. The jaguar warriors wore the pelts of the spotted cat, the carved wooden helmet merging the human face with the apex predator of the jungle floor. These were not ceremonial costumes. They were functional armor, deliberate psychological weapons, and declarations of earned status simultaneously. The military strategy of the Mexica aimed primarily at capture rather than elimination in the field, a distinction that shaped everything about how they fought, what weapons they preferred, and how their campaigns were organized.
Secure the holding areas first.
The Macuahuitl, the obsidian-edged wooden striking weapon with volcanic glass blades set along its sides, was designed to wound and incapacitate without ending the encounter.
The arm, disarm him quickly. Good, maintain focus.
Spanish soldiers in 1519 recorded that it could sever a horse's neck in a single swing. It was devastatingly effective, and its users were trained to stop short, to restrain a living opponent, to bring him back to Tenochtitlan intact. Because the Mexica understood the great campaigns of their empire not merely as political expansion, but as cosmic obligation. The city required it. The sun required it. And the warriors delivered. The encounter with the Spanish in 1519 was the collision of 2 worlds that had no framework for understanding each other. When Cortés and his column first approached Tenochtitlan along the southern causeway, they were met by Moctezuma II himself. Carried on a litter under a canopy of green quetzal feathers, the ground beneath him swept clean by attendants who walked ahead. The Spanish, overwhelmed by the scale and sophistication of what surrounded them, accepted the hospitality, and began immediately calculating how to take control of it.
Secure these 3 entrances immediately.
The sacred precinct is the primary objective. He says we must take the causeways now. You will come with us now, Emperor.
The tensions that followed, the Spanish seizure of Moctezuma within his own palace, the growing resistance from Mexica leadership, the eruption of open conflict, came to a breaking point on the night of June 30th, 1520, when the Spanish attempted to flee the city under darkness along the Tlacopan causeway. The Mexica discovered them. From both sides of the causeway, from canoes moving silently across the dark lake, warriors converged on the retreating column. The Spanish called that night La Noche Triste, the sad night. Hundreds of soldiers and their Tlaxcalan allies went into Lake Texcoco, many weighed down by the gold they had taken from the palace. The Mexica had made their own city into a weapon. The Spanish returned the following year with reinforced numbers, Tlaxcalan allies carrying generations of resentment against Mexica dominance.
Por Tlaxcala!
Steel weapons, horses, and smallpox, which had already swept through Tenochtitlan in the months between, taking somewhere between a third and half the population before a single additional soldier arrived. The siege of the city lasted 75 days. The final Mexica ruler, the young Cuauhtémoc, barely in his mid-20s, his name meaning descending eagle, held the causeways, the rooftops, and the canals against the advancing column until August of 1521. Cortés ultimately demolished the city as he advanced, filling the canals with rubble to neutralize the Mexica flanking tactics, turning the most sophisticated urban waterway network in the Western Hemisphere into the roadbed of his own advance. When the Spanish entered the ruins of the sacred precinct, they stood inside the greatest city the Americas had produced, and they systematically took it apart. The stones of the Templo Mayor went into the Cathedral of Mexico City. The stones of Moctezuma's palace became the foundations of colonial government buildings. The lake was gradually drained across the following century. The grid of colonial streets was laid almost precisely over the grid of Aztec avenues, the new city unable to entirely escape the geometry of what it had replaced. Tenochtitlan is still there, beneath the streets. The Templo Mayor excavation, ongoing since 1978, has recovered thousands of objects from its layered construction phases. Engineers who study Aztec hydraulic infrastructure describe the integrated Chinampa Canal aqueduct dike system as among the most elegant water management solutions in ancient history. Agricultural ecologists examining the Chinampa fields identify them as one of the most productive pre-industrial farming systems ever devised. Self-fertilizing, multi-harvest, sustainable from an environment that had no reason to support anyone at all. From a swampy island with no stone quarry, no iron, no wheel, and no certainty they would survive the next decade, in less than 200 years, the Mexica built a city that left the most seasoned soldiers of 16th century Europe reaching for words they didn't have. They called it a dream. It was the most real thing they had ever seen. If this story left you standing on that ridge beside Bernal Diaz, looking down at a city rising from water and refusing to believe your own eyes, then you already belong here. Subscribe to Mystique History, ring the bell, and never miss another journey into the moments that still stop the breath. History is not a textbook, it is a place, and we go there every single week. I'm your host at Mystique History, and I want to know, what historical event should I recreate next? Let me know in the comments.